All right, let's speak to David DeRocher, a professor at the Thayer Marshall Institute and a former Pentagon Director of Arabian Peninsula Affairs, also a former colonel with extensive experience in special operations, joining us live now from Phoenix in Arizona. Thank you for speaking to us here at Al Jazeera, David. Now, we know that Donald Trump has said that 3 U.S. destroyers passed through the Strait. So what were they doing, do you think? And what is their role in the U.S. Navy exactly?
Well, destroyers normally have multiple functions, but their primary function in this sort of conflict is either strike, so they launch missiles that can go inland and attack targets or other ships, or it's air defense, where they defend either on a shore surface or most frequently an aircraft carrier. So they're multifunction ships, but basically most of their offensive armament is in vertical missile launchers, and the missiles are either strike missiles or anti-aircraft missiles. So they were probably moving out. There's 3 aircraft carriers going in the Arabian Sea, and they were probably being brought out there to provide additional missile defenses for those 3 aircraft carriers.
Do you think it would have been a possibility at all that it was moving through the waters really to sort of send a signal to Iran that it has control over the Strait and perhaps to show its military might at this point?
Absolutely. Look, first off, the shipping channels are in Omani territorial waters, so that's something that needs to be emphasized whenever we talk about this. It's not as though the Iranians are trying to give the impression that these are transiting Iranian waters. That's not the case. But yeah, we have a long history of doing that, and we actually have an active program where we deliberately send U.S. Navy vessels through disputed waters in order to assert the right of passage. And in some instances, for example, with Canada, that brings us into conflict with Canada over passage between the islands in the Arctic archipelago. My favorite use of a ship to prove a point was in 1947 when the Soviet Union was making designs on the Bosporus. The Turkish ambassador to Washington died, and we returned his body to Istanbul aboard the USS Missouri, which of course was the ship that the Japanese had surrendered aboard 18 months before. Not a very subtle message, but a message received.
And David, do you think that the US doing this, do you think it perhaps could have been tactical, intentional, not to draw Iran into firing at it in international waters, perhaps also maybe to send a message that Iran is the threat here and that it can, if it wanted to, attack any ships, commercial or not?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, tactically...
to provoke Iran in a way to get... I guess what I'm saying is to provoke it to get a response, to show that Iran... to show it up, perhaps, is what I meant.
And perhaps to determine what Iranian countership batteries have not been destroyed or still capable of operations, to get Iranian naval headquarters to light up their air defense radars so that they can be targeted with Yes, all of that is possible. That's kind of the rope-a-dope strategy, where you recall the Muhammad Ali George Foreman fight, where Ali basically covered up for 8 rounds and then responded with the knockout punch. So that is possible, yes.
And David, you know, Trump has come out saying, no, the ceasefire is still holding. It seems we haven't heard anything otherwise from the Iranians. Are we likely to see in the next few days or perhaps weeks a new type of ceasefire, perhaps one that we've seen in Gaza, where there is a ceasefire in place technically, yet Israel is carrying out airstrikes almost daily still, targeted ones, they say. And then also we're seeing this in Lebanon. A ceasefire is still holding between Hezbollah and Israel, and yet we are still seeing attacks on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I think what you have the broad terms of the ceasefire, and what happens is the combatant parties try to negotiate what's acceptable within that. That usually provokes, there's usually some conflict and some response to that in the conflict. Out of that that dialectic, if you were, the combat dialectic, you get a new redefinition of the ceasefire. And I think that what happens is you have to go through several iterations of this until you define a norm in a practical ceasefire that's acceptable to both sides. Excellent question.
Thank you very much, David. Now, you're a former colonel with extensive experience in special operations. I don't know how this would be assessed, but there is 20,000 sailors that are on board all various types of ships that are stuck there in the Straits of Hormuz. Anyone living in this region right now knows that the summer temperatures are going to be absolutely soaring. We've heard from the UN saying that conditions are quite dire for many. Is any of that taken into consideration?
I think it is, but well, there's a broader issue, which is the international labor market for mariners is exploitative. There's been a race to the bottom. There's cost cutting, and the actual mariners themselves generally are recruited from poor countries that are unable to assure the rights of mariners. So that's the underlying issue. Specifically, yeah, you have absentee owners and pickup ships. I think that this model of commercial shipping really relies on a kind of exploitation of labor. And I think that things like the International Maritime Organization needs to take this into account. And I think countries that ship by sea perhaps need to revive national protections for the people who actually ship their products to and from their lands. It's more of an organized labor issue.
Certainly, that could perhaps become a humanitarian issue to be considered by all parties involved in this war. Thank you very much, David de Roche, a professor at the Thayer Marshall Institute, a former Pentagon Director of Arabian Peninsula Affairs, and also a former colonel with extensive experience in special operations. Thank you very much.